I just want to start saying thank you for spending your weekend learning about Windows 8, JavaScript, something which is very interesting. And here is a little bit about myself. My name is Wriju and I am accessible in Twitter. That's my handler. I work for Microsoft. My role is a little different than the previous two speakers. So I work as a lead partner consultant, which means that on a day-to-day basis, I do work with developers like you guys who are Microsoft partners who are building applications. And nowadays, we are heavily focused on Windows 8 apps. I'm involved into many application development scenarios, helping people putting their apps into store, going into a technical discussion in terms of designing that. So I'll try to share some of those experience. Some of those experience I cannot speak publicly because I'm under NDA with them. Those are their intellectual properties. But I'll try to share some of the experiences with you. So the topic here is about JavaScript because it is a JS foo, and then how we can build application using Windows 8. So what I'm going to cover, it's a huge topic. What I'm going to cover is the WinJS, the library which we provide to build an application for Windows 8. So what is WinJS? So you have seen that controls, you have seen data binding, you have seen templating mechanism. That's WinJS, right? So what is WinJS? It's not a framework. Just to be very clear about it, it's not a framework. It's a library, JavaScript library. Pretty much standard JavaScript library as you see today in any scenario. It's just like that. And it's got a bunch of files. When you get a reference to your project, it comes down. It's a pay-as-you-go model. So as and when you need some of the features of those libraries, then only it gets downloaded. It doesn't download the whole bunch of things. So you might have heard many a times Raj talking about single page navigation, right? So that is the main reason behind we have that concept here, so that it doesn't load every time those library files the moment you change those pages. Because the moment you go into those browser scenario sort of thing, it's stateless, right? It cannot save the state. So it keeps on moving between files, and then all the header, JS, CSS, everything has to get downloaded. So why not have a container sort of thing, which will host another page inside, and that container will actually be downloading all the CSS, JS, everything needed for your application once. And the rest of the time you navigate away, coming back, going into different sections of your application. You don't have to do those downloading all the time. So that's about WinJS. It's a huge thing. I mean, like you start exploring, you will know a lot of new features coming up. For example, those who are coming from the XAML background use some notification property, right? So you have a data binding. As soon as that data source changes to the background, your control refreshes automatically, right? So those kind of things we can use even in WinJS. So when you bind to a control, let's say ListView, for example, RSS feed, you don't have to do a refresh button manually and let people click on the refresh button to get those feed updated. You can use as, and that means that whenever there is an update, it can push that into the UI model for you. So there are many things. So what I'm gonna show you in a high level perspective, things which are there. Why it is not moving, by the way? Any reason? Do I need to use this? Okay. All right. Yeah. Thanks, you. So we have got a bunch of things here. You have seen binding. You have seen controls. There are animation templates. You have seen. Those are all part of WinJS. There are navigation, app model, promises. All these are part of that JavaScript library which we provide you. You just need to use it. You do not have to implement or write any of the stuff available over here. So what I'm going to start with that. You might have seen in Ujjal's talk, there was a diagram he showed about the Windows runtime, if you remember that. So there is a Windows API at the bottom, and sitting on top of it, WinRT, which can talk to various different programming languages like C#, C++, or JavaScript. So how we actually abstract that operating system level API and let the developer consume that API irrespective of different languages they are using or comfortable with. So for example, if you are comfortable with JavaScript, why you should be learning C# at the end of the day to build an application in Windows 8? You can continue building using JavaScript, but you can also continue using the rich set of APIs which comes within the operating system, which you can consume that. So that's the first demo which I'm going to show. So let me just go and start an application. Is this? Yep. So let me just open this blank application, Visual Studio, and say create a new project. And I will choose the blank application because that's much more clean. It creates less confusion for us as a new developer. So there's a source control connected. I'll just ignore that. So what it's gonna do, it's gonna get you a bunch of files to start with. Okay, I don't want this. So it's gonna get you a reference. If you can see here, let me just zoom it. So it's gonna get you reference. You can see that under this reference you have Windows library for JavaScript 1.0. Okay, this reference is nothing but few CSS files and JavaScript files. So you can see that there are two CSS files, UI-dark, UI-light. So you might have seen some application coming up with a white background. Some applications are black background. By default, it is dark. So when you create your application, it becomes black color. But in the default.html on top, if you change it to light, it becomes white color. You can also define your own CSS and then define the color scheme on that. But that's the main CSS which we give you out of the box. And you get the base.js, which is the main JavaScript library under which everything gets handled. And you get also the UI.js for UI elements and so on and so forth. You can see some of the other utility.js also included. Now this is part of the reference to your project. This is not any of the files you are creating or you are writing. So what you are writing is just below. You have got CSS, images, and JS. So right now we have selected a blank template that has got only one HTML. Someone asked during Ujjal's talk about how that HTML looks like. You might have seen already in Raj's talk. So it's very simple. It has got HTML, couple of CSS, couple of JavaScripts, right? What is additional over here is the JavaScript corresponding to this page. So every page you create, you should be creating one CSS and a JavaScript corresponding to that. So from my experience, I must say that JavaScript is all about discipline, right? So you need to follow some pattern to make sure that after some time, if you come back to your own code, you are able to understand your code, right? What you have written. So what we follow is the same name convention. If you have defined HTML, default.html, you will be defining default.css and default.js are those two corresponding files. Now, if you have any dependent JavaScript files which has got data which will get loaded, you need to put it over here depending on where that script has to be loaded. So if you assume that that script has to be loaded prior to my UI element, then you need to put it on top of it. Otherwise, you will put it on the below of it, right? But if you put it on below, which has got dependency to the UI element, or the other way around, the UI element has got dependency to those objects, then it's gonna get an error, right? So you have to be very careful about how you sequentially put JavaScript files one after another into this header section. Now body is fairly simple. It has got only one page property. So let me just go back to the normal mode and remove this to a div tag. That's how it should be. So I put an ID saying that content and just leave it like that. No designing, just a div with an ID. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to open the JS file which got created, has got some junk code which I don't really understand as a developer. So what I'm going to do, delete everything. Okay, every HTML5 JS application in Windows 8, JavaScript is hidden under an anonymous function. How do you define that anonymous function? Is this visible to all of you who are sitting at the back side of this code window? Clearly visible, right? So you put something like this. That's it. And you define your function inside this. And here you're going to write. So the moment default or HTML loads, it starts executing this JavaScript. So you can create an event function. You can bind that event to a control. You can put an anonymous function body, and it will start executing. Right? So sequentially, obviously. So for example, I want to use some of the Windows API from my JavaScript. So the moment we go by the namespace concept, you see there is a namespace called Windows. And if I zoom it up and go here, let me use the mouse. Yeah. Now, if you see that, it has got a bunch of namespaces within it. You have application model, you have devices, foundation, graphics, media, networking, so on and so forth. So let's suppose I want to use this media, and I say that media.capture.camera capture UI, and I define a variable here var cam equals to new. This is a class. So I new it up, the camera capture API. Now the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to say that what this camera is going to do. It's going to take a picture or a video. I'm going to use my inbuilt camera. You can use any camera. So let's say I say var mode of the camera equals to Windows dot media So how many of you have built application which uses camera? Any one of you? On any platform? Which platform? Android. So how much line of code you have written? 30. So to save the camera and everything, right? Good. So just notice here how I'm doing it. So I'll say media capture. So let me just zoom it back in. So I'll say, I'll say capture UI mode dot photo. So I'm going to take photo. That's how I say it. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to invoke a method to actually take the picture. So how do I do that? I'll say cam dot capture file asynchronous. Now in WinJS, every call is async, and you have probably understood over a period of time why it is important, because we don't want UI to get compromised because of the time we are taking to do something in the background. We want UI to be as responsive as possible, fast and fluid. So JavaScript by default is not asynchronous, right? So we follow some pattern to actually make it asynchronous call and make your life as a developer much easier when you basically combine multiple callbacks into a chain of callbacks and do things sequentially in the async call. If you have done async in a low level programming, you might have seen how painful it is to bind things into one sequence and get a great output without any error, right? So what you have done that every method you find under WinJS has got async. So how that pattern looks like? It looks like that there's a function. So this takes mode, which is the photo mode, and then there is a pattern called then. So what this then means that it takes things and it processes. Now then accepts three parameters. First parameter, so when it's done. Second parameter is if you want to capture error, and third parameter is this complete event. So basically that's a pattern we have followed from the practices around the world. I have a link to share with you, which I'll show this where this is publicly announced. So this is called promise. At the end of the day, it means that I'm doing something. I promise that I'll return you something. Whether you do it or not doesn't really matter. So promises are optional in WinJS, which means that you may or may not be bothered about the promise object which you are getting. So if you don't bother about the promise object, you don't play with that object, you just simply ignore it. But at the end of the day, it will also give you the promise object. If you want to play with it, do play with it. Most of the time we need that. Now at this, then what we need is a function, and inside that function we need a parameter, let's say FL, and then this function looks like this. And now my JavaScript call ends over here. What I'm going to do inside this function, when it's done, I define a variable called captured file, maybe equals to FL. Okay. And after doing that, what I'm going to do is that I have got a div. I want to display that picture in the div. So how it looks like. So let's first run this without displaying into the div. Now this is something which you need to understand. Like if you are using user device, right, and you are invoking some of the components of your user device, as a developer, it's your responsibility to tell user that I'm going to use your internet connection or camera, and then that belongs to the permission. And when you develop, there we set up capabilities you have seen in the manifest file. You will sign one of them. So how do you do that? So let me first do that. Let me go back to that and then open the package manifest, app manifest, and just stop it. Go to the application capabilities and select the webcam one, which is the bottom of this list, right? And I save this and run this. Now this time what is going to happen, it's going to ask you again that I'm going to launch the camera application from your desktop, right? I say allow. This is one time activity. Next time you run, you don't ask you. So this is me, okay? Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take a picture, not so good, something like this, and I say okay. This is all JavaScript, right? It's done. Picture is taken. Now as a developer, what I have to do, I have to play with this object. So let me write few lines of code. Okay, let me come back and into the default.js and say var div equals to, as you might have done many HTML JS programming, this is same, get element by ID, you put the ID, you define content, that's my div, okay, and then you define an image object saying that img equals to document dot create element, and then you define the element tag as img. You have to be very careful about typing. And then once it is done, you have to define a source, src. So what is the source of the image? Right now, this is just a string, right? So we need to provide a URL. So what we can do, we can save this file to some location and then give the URL. But from the HTML5 onwards, what we are given? We are given a concept of creating on-the-fly URL. So you have blob, you push that blob, it will create a temporary URL which has a lifetime within that application, and you can actually use that URL as the source of your application or source of the image tag. How do you do that? Sorry. So it's from HTML5, not prior to that. So you say that var URL equals to, there's an object called URL, capital, and then you're a create object URL. And inside this create object URL, you have passed the captured file which you have saved from the camera. That becomes the URL of your image tag, which you're gonna get into this. And the last thing you need to do is that div dot append child and then append the img tag you just now have created with that image. Let's run it once more. Okay. All right. I have to be here. Take a pic. Something fun. Okay. Now I say okay. It goes into my application back. This is my application. You can see that. This is my application. Okay. It goes back to my application and stays within the div. Right. Now, this is not a great looking application because I started from blank. I'm not a great designer, so I cannot give you wow experience. But at the end of the day, this is what you will be doing. Now, the more thing, just imagine that how many of you have faced challenges while interacting with the operating system API through your JavaScript. It's not at all recommended, first of all, right? But when you come to this kind of environment, You have got more power. You have got WinJS, that's a great setup library. You have got WinRT, so you get additional thing. And we have been building libraries year after year in every browser releases. So in IE10, you have got a bunch of new APIs which you can continue use in your HTML JS application. Plus, you have got WinRT. Now I'm going to show you that. How many of you have seen Windows 8 operating system so far? Great. So you know that there is a user photo which comes here, right? There is a lock screen photo also comes here. So when you unlock, there is a photo here, right? Now, I want to do that. From my application, the photo I'm taking, I want to set that as my user pic from the JavaScript using WinRT, no WinJS. Okay. So let's just go back to my application, and I'm setting it in div. That's fine. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to say Windows dot system dot user profile dot user information dot get account picture, or set account picture async. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to send the captured file, the file I have received from this, and this is async. This is optional. I can put then and nothing inside the then. I can put a message saying that picture has been changed, anything you want to do. But if you then is optional, you don't have to put then over here. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to run this application again, stop it and run. So this is going to take my pic. So let me run it again. Okay. And I say okay. Just a moment. As I continue.
You need to pass some arguments.
Sorry?
You need to pass some arguments, extra arguments.
Yeah, you are right. So what I missed, I think I have to, here in this case, then is mandatory. So I have to say then and then leave it. Okay. So let me just run it once more. This camera, come back. It's very dark over here. So let me take one more chance. It's not coming. The picture is not showing up. Yes. Take the pic. Say okay. This should ideally work. I'm not sure why it is not working, because the picture you have seen just now I have tried outside before I come into that. So let me just say Windows user profile user information set account pictures. I put a wrong method. So I'll say set account picture async, not the pictures. So let me run it. Okay. Sorry about it. One more time. Camera is not responding. Yes. I say okay. Now this says you that confirm the account picture. Do you want to set that account picture? This is the Windows activity. As an end user you do. You are doing it through JavaScript. I say change the account picture. Now what it's going to do is that in my desktop I get a new picture over here. Also in the lock screen I get a little bigger size of that same picture included into this, right? So that's the capability you get in JavaScript while developing Windows 8 application. It gives you a lot of opportunity in terms of what is there in the operating system obviously with limited resources because you can't really play with everything in the operating system. But there are a lot of things in the operating system which you can control through your JavaScript coding as you can do with C#. Now let me go into the next phase of the demo. So let me do one thing. So what I have seen that the application model, how it looks like, right? How the HTML looks like and how WinJS and script, where you write those scripts and how you execute that. You can execute differently. You can have a button click event and then you can attach the event, because at the end of the day, JavaScript is all about event-driven programming. So everything has to go through event, so you can associate that event. Now we'll talk about the promise a little later, but before that, what I'm going to show you is that how the async model really looks like in JavaScript, right? Everywhere within the JavaScript for Windows 8, it's async. Okay. So how there are quite a few models how you can implement async model. One is a callback mechanism, right? What you can set timeout, you can call a function and then put a wait time or something like that. You can also do an event handler sort of mechanism, have some sort of element and then associate the function to certain event of that function. For example, the image tag, while it is loading, you want to do something, right? So what we follow is the second pattern within the WinJS, and it's fairly simple. So how do you do that? It basically, we follow the pattern called promises. So you might have seen this link at the bottom of my, okay, so let me just open this link over here into this. If the internet is working, hope it is working, because my next demo requires internet connection. Okay, it is working. So that's the common JS pattern. So we follow that specification of a promise exactly the same within the WinJS. So if you go a little down into this spec, you find this code over here. Let me just increase the size of this screen. So you can see that there's an async to answer everything, and then there's a then, and then you do something, that's a function. And the second function is all about handling error. And you can also have a third function. So that's how the pattern looks like. So everywhere in your JavaScript, you might find nested then. So how it works, for example, you are loading some URL. Let's say the common form could be RSS feed. So I've got a bunch of RSS feed in a collection. And then you are getting into every RSS feed and getting the content from within those RSS feed. So you can pretty much create nested WinJS XHR calls within the promises. So it can be heavily nested, and at the end of the day, you might find pages, which is basically one line of code, right? So that it can happen. So for you to connect or combine multiple promises is very easy. So let's see how we can do that. So in the same application where we are writing things for camera, so let us just go ahead and remove this, zoom, and go back to our application. Now in this application, what I'm going to do is that, let me reduce the size of the screen. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to get this out of my screen, out, okay. I'm going to write a few lines over here. So in WinJS, if you just type it out, WinJS, there is an XML HTTP request, right? Object that helps you consume any web data. So for example, that's known as XHR. Now in this XHR, it takes quite a few parameters. In fact, while I was trying to solve one of the issues with our partners, we found that they were creating a news application, right? And they were consuming the web. The weird error they were facing, that first time it was loading, showing up everything, close that application, run second time. It is giving you some error within the base.js, which is not your file, okay? Some error. And then he was trying to deploy it to another fresh machine and trying to see that. So when you deploy, you don't get into the debug mode, so it was crashing next time. So we figured out that if we delete the debug folder of the Visual Studio output, then it works, which is not a great solution for an application to run, right? What will happen when you have an installed application? Will you ask user to go ahead and delete the folder? You won't, right? So there was something which is happening. I never seen that so far with XHR. So what we figured out that somehow it is caching something into the debug folder, which is taking value from there. How you want to cache that? So because it was a HTTP request, we have added a HTTP header into that with no cache, which means that every time it will get you the fresh content from the web you call, right? And it solved the problem, right? And I blogged about it also. So that basically talks about the capability of WinXHR, WinJS XHR, because you cannot just add the header, you can also add the response type. So how many of you have used Fiddler? Fiddler, the debugger tool? Yeah, great. So Fiddler allows you to change those application type, the response type, those headers, everything at runtime. You can pretty much do everything over here. For example, your data is coming in form of XML, response is coming in form of XML. You want to convert that to JSON, right? So you can do that. You can just change the type application/JSON, it becomes JSON. You can purely make it text, application/text, it becomes text. So pretty much all the HTTP header you can add. You can add it continuously one after another. But the pattern looks like this. And anything you see in WinJS with this means that you assign the property values after after colon. So there's a property called URL. Okay, and I'll put a colon, and here your URL would be. So your URL may look like http://www.microsoft.com. Okay, that's the URL you are reading. Now this is async. You have to call then. Okay, and inside the then, so inside this then, you define a function which takes a variable, maybe RSS, let's leave it like that, and you end up your function call. So what this means that the object you are getting out of this XML HTTP response, a request, is this response object. So how do you handle that? So for example, you can store it to a variable, so saying that var data equals to RSS, that object, and you say response.text type XML, anything you want to get. So you can just simply take text, which is to be safer in my case because I'm going to show it in div. But you can pretty much take the XML and do a XPath query to filter it out going forward. So for example, if you are reading the RSS 2.0 feed, you know there's a item, and then inside that item you have title and you have that author, date, pub date, all these things. That's pretty much standard. So you can pretty much pass on the query selector, which is again HTML CSS field, and then get those in an array format. So for example, you want to only get the titles, you can use the query selector all and pass on the title element, and it will get you all the title in an array. And you can actually display that within the table format or within the div one after another, whatever way you want to show. But here I'm going to get the complete text. So let's just use document.getElementById, and I use the content grid. So I'll say content, and I say inner text and pass on data. As simple as that. Let me run this, and it's going to get ugly. It's going to get you all the value and then show you up into this tiny little application which has no meaning. But as a developer, you have got the complete data in your hand, and it's up to you how you want to play with that data, right? So you may want to play with this data in a different way. You may want to build an RSS feed or something like that. So let me show you one example which I was working on before. I thought that I will show it today, but let me show you that sample. It's a fairly simple sample. So I'll say that new Visual Studio, and this is nothing but a shameless plug here, showing off my blog. So what this basically is doing, it's same template, the blank template. You can see there is no additional page, no additional JavaScript, nothing, right? Only the blank template, only one default.html, and in that default.html I have got few binding template which Raj demonstrated you using the WinJS binding.template, and then there is a control which is ListView control, which is displaying my list of blogs. So what basically it is doing, it is trying to read my blogs RSS feed. So right now I've changed it to MSDN. So anybody's posting anything to the MSDN blog is getting into one single field, one after another. So you find pretty much the current blog of MSDN. So let me just run this and see if that can respond back. So this uses the light theme. Nothing fancy about it. I don't know anything about CSS at that great extent to change many things. So it basically shows you all the blogs. There's a picture associated. So if you have something in the blog, you can get the picture. You can also hard code that picture, anything of like whatever you want. So this uses the navigation pattern, the horizontal navigation pattern. You can see that scrolling the mouse, it is taking that. Now if you open any one of the blog, it shows you the blog over here. Now it's gonna get you a few pictures from the blog. It's slowly using that. So it's a multi-column list box, okay, using complete CSS. So what we have done is that we have created one page, that is default.html, put two div. One div is the first list box. It's not two page. One div is this list box. So when this div is displaying, we are hiding the another div. As simple as that. The moment you click anything over here, we are displaying the other div and hiding the parent div. On the back button click, we are getting back to the home page, which means that we are hiding the current div and showing you the previous div. That's it. That's the concept of single page application, SPA, what do you call it, right? Now you can also have nested multiple things if you don't want to dynamically do that, because at the end of the day, if you keep on doing a lot of HTML stuff into one file, you're gonna get crazy because you have no clue what is what, and at the designer level, you won't be able to get a great help. So what I'm gonna show you as a developer, if you are really scared about big HTML file and don't want to play with that, is that we also give you a free version of Expression Blend with the SDK download for HTML and also for XAML. So what you can do in the same application, if you open in Blend, there's an option, right? It also comes with the Express installation. So if you have no Visual Studio, you can still continue building application on Windows 8 using the complete free tool set, right? So, and this is the Blend for Visual Studio, and this is a great tool. So what it does, it gives you a live view, which means that right now if you go back to my Visual Studio, you see that I don't see the designer interface, right? It doesn't have a WYSIWYG, what do you see, what do you get sort of interface in the Visual Studio, which is unfortunate, which is there in ASP.NET, but it's not yet. But in the Blend, you get that same interface. If you go here, it shows you now it is reading the feed from live. You can see that list box got generated. This list box is not hard coded. It's reading the RSS feed and populating the list box. Now you can see that there's a test, there is something which is going on, right? Now there is a interactive mode, which means that you can navigate between pages. So for example, right now we are in default.html and we have made the default.html in such a way that based on our action, the design changes within the page itself. There is no other page. So I go into the interactive mode like this, and I navigate to the other content of this page. And I thought that this is not a right design which I have applied. Let me just go ahead and change this design, right? I can't do it in Visual Studio unless I'm super efficient about CSS. So what I can do over here, I can go into this mode and it shows you here, and there's a live DOM also associated. You can point to the body, you can point to the element, and then there is a CSS associated shows up. Also, this shows you the default CSS which comes up over here, which is the CSS for this file, and also the HTML of that default. So you can, if you want to modify on your own something inside this, you can go ahead and do that. So this is the CSS. You see pretty much very small in size. Let me just increase the area a little bit. So you can see that complete CSS. Now, if I just select this, now there's a MS grid column, which is using the grid concept, and then you can see that there are banner, back button, main title, content, then there is an article list also, and then at the end of the day you have got article content, which is this style which we are talking about. Now you may not know which style it is implemented over here, but it helps you through the live DOM which is loaded. You can see that this is the hash article content with the CSS tag. The moment you select here, it shows you in the UI. You can add those property values, or you can manually handwrite something you want to do. So you can see that we have given the overflow X as auto and Y as hidden. That's why you don't see the horizontal scrolling. And the moment you put it in a snap view, you might have known that in Windows 8 you can put your application in a snap view, which means that you drag from the top and put it inside. It becomes in a column, and then you can side by side run two applications, right? In the snap view, you may want to display that in a single column through using the horizontal scrolling, because this doesn't make sense. You keep on having the same, vertical scrolling, keep on having the same horizontal scrolling because that space is limited, right? So how do you change that? So we have got CSS queries. So if I go back into this, now you see also the assets. So assets mean that what are the HTML content, what are the things you might have in your application, what are the references you have, what are the medias you have. So all these are included into this. It's a great tool. I really feel it's a great tool to work with because it gives you a runtime feel. And at the runtime, you can change the design. You can see here, I'm seeing the article over here, and I go back to the interactive mode again, and I can switch back to another article which is test, which is something somebody is trying to configure their live writer, I guess. And then I go into that thing, you get little view of that article, right? Now something I want some, yeah, this is a rich article. Now you can actually see this article, and let's stick to this. So you don't have to write any fake to actually get into this kind of situation, which we often do achieve through fake, right? You can use this WYSIWYG interface and then keep on changing the way it should look like, and then build your application. This is a great tool, a must-to-have tool while designing the CSS. It gives you a bunch of things because in CSS3 you have so many things. You, as a person, it's really tough to remember all of them. But if you get a reference, you know that what you need to put. You also see that what are the options within the top. You can select any one of them and then do the padding, position, layout, grid. So if you want to see that, this is a grid layout. And if you want to put some sort of definition to that -m is dash grid, that's proprietary to Microsoft. So you can associate that also. So there are a lot of them. So you can see that a lot of those elements are displayed over here into this, right? So let me just go back, close this. And this two works very well together. So if you change anything over there, it will prompt you in this screen saying that something has been modified outside of Visual Studio. You say yes to all. It comes back to your Visual Studio in the modified code, right? Now, this is the example I want to demonstrate. If you just open the default.html, it's simple WinJS XHR call, and it calls the URL and does use the query selector as I was talking earlier. So here, what I'm doing, I'm reading the response.xml so that I can do a little bit of XPath query and get the things out of that, extract the things out of my RSS feed. So I know the RSS feed follows a certain pattern. I just selected item, and inside the item you have title. So basically you have got item list. So you have got item, and each of the item will have a nested element, XML element called title, which basically holds the title of the blog. So I'm basically getting those, all the items, and running a for loop for that item. And I can actually go and see that each of the item will have title inside that, and I'm getting that into collection. Now, everything in JavaScript is in form of array. So you can see that I'm building an array called article, okay? And I'm giving a runtime property to that article array called title and content. That's how I do. I never defined that prior to this line, okay? So I have got an article array, and then title and content, and also there is an image here. Now there is an article list, which is basically the WinJS list. So if you go a little up into this code file, you find this article list is available over here, right? And then this article list, I'm basically pushing that object. So article list is at the end of the day, it's an array which gets the collection of the element called article. So you can see over here, little below, once it is completed, it has got a magical method. Now you remember that if you're starting from a blank page application, you should be running that application. So let me go back to my Visual Studio. There should be a magical method present in your application called process all. That means that in WinJS, whatever control you use from that library, it keeps on creating a queue for those controls and makes it ready for you. It doesn't load. Okay? And the moment you bind something to that control, that moment the control loads. So this is the key element of your application, the HTML JS application. So wherever you are writing an application, you need to have this present at least once. In this case, because it is a single page, we keep it in default or HTML. So if you follow the navigation pattern which Raj talked about, which within the content you load another page, you don't have to call that process all to the child page because it is already called in the host page, right? So, but if you're individually loading that page in your screen without that content page location which is default or HTML, then you have to call this WinJS UI.processAll within that corresponding JS file of that application, right? So that's how it should look like, right? Now, there are a lot of practices in terms of how you define or expose your data. Now, as I said that all are private, all are encapsulated within one anonymous function. As you can see also, I started with a blank page and put 2 parentheses. It's also the same. So it starts with a blank function. Now, how you expose that data, which means that you have loaded the JavaScript, but it's not available to anybody unless you follow a pattern called associating event. For example, if you see here, the back button click event is added. So this back button is a DOM element. So what we have done, we have taken the back button from the getElementById method and then associated the click event. So it is there in the DOM. You don't have to worry about it. But when you want to expose the JavaScript function, right? Because we are not adding that function over there. If you add that function over there, it won't work. Seriously speaking, because it's not exposed. How do you expose the function? Make it public, basically, is by a concept called namespace. So it's also part of WinJS. So what is the declaration may look like? It may look like WinJS.namespace.define, and you put some arbitrary text which uniquely identifies your function parent or the container. So why this is here? So let's say I'm using some JS library which has got getHTML, and I also built some function which has getHTML. If I load both the JS file on my header, then it's gonna get conflict. So which one it will call is some sort of confusing. So to uniquely identify my own method, I put something which is unique, maybe your company name, maybe related to your application, maybe something which is unique and not possible for others to use. So what I've used some sort of unique name over here, which I don't think anybody will use, and expose this item list element, right? This property, and pass the article list, which I was pushing the article element within it. It's an array, right? So what this item list is basically doing, if you see over here, it basically is going into the default or HTML and using that item data source attribute of that data win option for the article list, and then putting the item list dot data source. That's how it does. So it basically using, now remember one thing, any data list view control of WinJS uses a list element. Now we have exposed array. How can it take the array as a list? It can take the array as a list because there is a data source property. So if I go back to my data.js and then just show you something like this. article list. Sorry about it. Now you can see that this is the list. Now list takes array and converts it. Just like if you have done C# programming, if you have an array, you can say toList, or IEnumerable list, you can say toList. It becomes iList enabled. So that's how we convert it to list. So remember one thing: if you have a list control, you have to pass a list object to bind it. So if you pass simple array, it don't work. So you have to actually convert it by writing one single line from WinJS binding.list and then pass on the article list. Now if I go into this article list, if I put dot over here, now it says that one of the properties would be data source. Okay, so what this data source is doing is basically giving you the list object output as a return type so that it can bind to the control and bind to the template you are using over there on top of it. So that's how it is binding that element. Now let me just go back to my application and show you a few things. Now assume that there is an error into this URL ww1, which is not a valid URL. So let's suppose there are too many things in WinJS actually. It's hard to manage. So if I run this, it's gonna get you an error. Let's see. Because that URL is not correct. Intentional. Either it don't run, it won't show anything, something like that. Why? Good, no error. Okay, let me just put some 197. Hopefully this will not display. So this function, let me run it. Trying to asynchronously call, so that's why UI came up without waiting for the backend. So nothing is there, so that's why nothing is displayed. So no data came. So if you run an XML HTTP request and do a query selector, it's gonna get you an error because there is no XML, right? So let me just stop here and show you the debugging experience. Is it not coming over here? So let me check my internet connection. So you can start asking questions. While any question, anything you want to ask about this? It's a limited time, we cannot cover the complete whole of WinJS. It's a huge library. I wish I could have get some 2 to 3 hours slot to show you some of the stuff. But I think what I wanted to show you is the capability over there. And one thing, I believe that if you are building Windows 8 application, you should be following only one site. That's dev.windows.com. It's easy to remember. Dev.windows.com. You don't have to remember the complicated MSDN URL. It will actually redirect you to the dev.windows.com. Few things I want to highlight into that portal, which I felt while I was trying to learn, is really helpful for a developer who is trying to do something on his own, is that this set, Windows Store Apps. When you go inside docs, you find documentation, but as a developer, we want to follow something which is already there. So all the features under WinJS are available into this set of samples. So if you go into the JavaScript samples of this page, it gets you some 100 plus MBs of size covering every feature of WinJS. So if you think that you want to get X HR request in your application, go ahead and follow that sample. Everything is there. Okay. So I would highly recommend you to get into that SDK sample and play with that sample. One thing I also feel that is very important, that you know the feature and you know where to steal the code from. Okay. So that makes your life very easy. So there is a hands-on lab we have provided called Contoso Cookbook. So that hands-on lab, where is the link? Yeah, hands-on lab for Windows 8. Now it has got both the versions. So those who are comfortable doing XAML can continue doing XAML. this is HTML. So how it looks like, if I open my download location of WinJS, connect resources, and then JavaScript HTML, you find 8 labs. 8 labs containing all those features. So someone asked about the live tiles. So it is there. The live tile and notification. How do you implement live tile and notification? It's just configuration. So you have to provide your web service URL and all this thing. And then how you make your application snappable. And when it is loaded in portrait mode, how you change those CSS. And all this stuff is mentioned over here. The simple thing, what you can probably think of saying into this CSS file is that you can see that CSS query selector is available over here. So this 4 things actually drives the UI look and feel in various orientation of your device. So first one talks about full screen and landscape. You can see that. So for example, everything you do on top is implemented all across. But if you want to specifically change some of the view, for example, during the snap view, you want to make your multi-column output to single column output, change it in the snap view for that article content, and then make that multi-column to 0. That's it. Then it becomes 1 column. So the moment you change it, this application will identify this through this media query and will apply that CSS into your application. So you don't have to write any code to do that. You just need to put the right CSS into right place, and application will fire the event and pick that through the CSS media query and apply that CSS element into that HTML so that your design changes automatically. So for example, if you have, I don't know if I have, so let me just try opening one of other things which I was trying to do. It's a tag block. So again, it says RSS feed. So if the internet is connected, then it will bring in some boxes. Yeah. So you can see that Scott Guthrie's blog is coming up. Just shows up here. So if you go back into that Visual Studio, okay, and then open it in simulator, because I'm not running it in high resolution due to the projector, so it is 1024 now. Now the snap view works in more than 1300 resolution, so it has to be more than 1300. So now this is running. Let it load. I can change the screen resolution to 1366 by 768. Now once it loads, there is nothing. Yeah, there is nothing. So I can't actually, yeah, I can put it in a snap view like this. But in my, so if you are developing something, if your desktop screen resolution is less than 1366, you can't really get this snapping. So don't get frustrated, which I was getting earlier. So you have to have this minimum screen resolution to get this snap view. So once it's snap view, you want to see how that look and feel looks like. Now, as I was talking, this is your desktop. So it is basically a virtual environment of your own machine. So if you open that tech blog, which I was working earlier, now side by side I can open 2 applications. Now I can open this tech blog in this mode. Now you can see that using the media query, it changed the look and feel, right? Now it is not aligning into horizontal direction, it is aligning vertically, all the 4, right? So now if I go into any of the blog, you can see that it is coming up here and it's displaying all of them, right? If I go back, it changes the behavior automatically. I haven't written any code. Using the CSS Media Query, it is just doing things. So things are pretty simple. If you go out today from this convention center, do you feel like developing application using this technology? Then I'll feel you are spending time over here, and because see, I come from a web development background and I come from an open source background, right? Prior to joining Microsoft. So I was missing that charm for a long time.
WinJS is an open source or?
No, it's not open source, but the code is available to you. It's a library by Microsoft, but the code is available for you. It's at the end of the day JSON.
It is handbar.js jQuery template. So we can create some templates and implement that.
Yes.
WinJS that feature or no?
Yeah, so you can implement the JavaScript within your application, which are third-party libraries, but the rest will be there for the script injection.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I'm using through WinJS, so it has that feature. I don't bother about that.
No, probably the question should be something different. Through WinJS, not. So you have to actually load the library in an HTML file and use those functions from within the file.
Hi.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not sure I missed this. I was attending other session as well in the middle. How good is the .NET support, or can we actually use .NET mixed kind of programming in we can use WinJS as well as the .NET part, the same as?
Yes, you can. So I think there's a T-shirt. So specify the size of your T-shirt so that we can give you the right one. The one you asked. Yeah, just ask them the size and then. Yeah. So yeah. So right, that's a good question. So that's what Raj actually mentioned. Is the mic not working? No, your mic is working. Okay. So that's what Raj talked about, the security. How you ensure that your logic is not used by someone, because at the end of the day, if you install a application into your from the store, it basically downloads or has all CSS, HTML, and JS into that folder. So if you're clever enough, you can go and pick out the JS file and steal the code from there. You may not want to do that because those are libraries spent years, days, time to create those libraries, right? So what we have given an option for you is that you can build hybrid model, which means all your business logic, you can build a WinRT library using C# or C++ and consume that WinRT library from your JavaScript application. So basically your business logic, let's say the string manipulation you are doing, array manipulation or something like that, can be encapsulated within a C# code, which at the end of the day becomes DLL, the WinRT DLL, and you call that DLL from your JS.
And what about the existing .NET capabilities? I will be able to directly use that. Right?
No. So this WinRT is a scaled down version of the .NET Framework runtime. So it is not a .NET Framework runtime. Just to give you the idea. So people, when they run a .NET application, they have to have a .NET Framework installed in that operating system. But this WinRT comes as part of your operating system. It's sitting on top of the kernel. It's not a separate installation. You cannot install WinRT. You cannot install or you cannot uninstall WinRT. It is just like Win32 library, sitting on top of your kernel. Using the capability, you build an application. Even if you do not have .NET Framework installed in your machine, you can still run Windows Store application because it doesn't require .NET Framework.
Apologies for the interruption, but Windows 7 comes with the .NET Framework 3.5 as default, right? So it's kind of
that's packaged along with the operating system. Yeah. So that's packaged along with the operating system. So you can unpackage it. Which means you can go to this thing, control panel, and uninstall .NET Framework if you don't like. So if you go in a server model, there's an application server role you have to enable, right? If you go to Windows Server 2003. So the moment you enable that role, it basically installs the .NET Framework, which is already there in your machine, right? So that's what I'm talking about. Do you really install kernel? You don't, right? It comes with the operating system package, right? You cannot uninstall kernel. Like that, it is just like that. WinRT is part and parcel of the core operating system. So for example, if you are if you might have seen that video on Surface, it's a tiny little device. It doesn't give you a desktop mode. So if you have to install .NET Framework, how do you install that .NET Framework? It has to be a Windows Store application to be able to install it, right? So we have it already within the operating system to help you run your application. So the thing is that if you consider the Windows Phone environment, that is a scaled down version of the Silverlight which you use in the desktop or out of the browser mode is just the same here. So that is a scaled down version of the .NET Framework. So you won't get things like ADO.NET, Entity Framework into WinRT. Even you cannot use it. So what we allow you to use is that OData. So if you are consuming or talking to a database, you ideally should not be having a database server installed in your local machine, right? what you can do, you can consume the database from some other location through the web service or the OData feed. Yeah.
Hi. I have a question. Building a Windows 8 mobile app and building a Windows 8 OS app. How much of code reusability we can do? Like obviously UI will change. Like related to functionality wise, how much of code reusability I can do?
So, frankly speaking, I haven't seen the Windows Phone 8 so far, not even the SDK. Okay. So, but what I feel is that the UI has to be changed because it's a UI, the form factor changes, the size of the screen changes. So you have to design your application in such a way that this how the code is reusable. So if you follow the MVVM pattern, model view model pattern, all your business logic in C# file, which easily can be portable to your Windows Phone application, right? Similarly, I'm not sure about the HTML, JS, how it will interact because I cannot comment. I haven't seen that so far on Phone 8. So I can talk about Phone 7 perspective, but not Phone 8.
I have a query. Every page in the Windows application, except the base page, is dynamic, right? Except the base page, every content will be loaded to the base page.
You can. I mean, like, it's not hard and fast rule.
Before creating the page, how the search can be handled?
So go ahead.
Except the base page in the application.
Correct.
Every pages are dynamically loaded. So before creating the page, in the morning session, we will do that. Before activating your application, you can search the pages in that application. Before actually loading the content into the page, before creating the page, how can I search the page?
Okay, that's a good question. So, if you see the store application, so let's say if you see the store application, let me just. So T-shirt. So this store has got bunch of applications, right? But right now for me, few of them are loaded. These are all featured applications. Now, for example, if I want to enable the search, now I type something, let's say I. That searches within the application, which means there is some web service or some public API from where data is getting consumed, right? So we are using that API to search the content and show you over here. It is actually creating the page, correct? So what you probably are thinking is that maybe something like your page is getting loaded and then it is searching within that load content. It is not. So the data source might be something. It might be reading the data from web. It might be reading the data from your local file folder, right? So if you're reading the data from the web, you can use the same URI to fetch the data which you're looking for. If that is matching, you display that content and show it here. So this is a different view when you do the searching. So this also you have written in your application, this view, okay? And then if you are searching content which is within the file folder, you are searching content within your file folder and loading that from the file folder. So that's how you do it.
We develop single page applications. Are we restricted to single page applications or we can develop?
No, you can pretty much go for a multi-page application, like you can navigate away from the default HTML and have your own page loaded. But the only thing is that you have to also pay for the download thing. So the base class libraries and everything. So the classic sample could be, let's see, if I go and open this default.html, right now it is using UI dark, right? If I change it to light and then run my application, it becomes white. Okay. Now if you have some content within and if you are using the single page model, this CSS won't get downloaded again, because the other page controller, which we call it, will not have that CSS header at all. So how do you define that page handler? So maybe you may have, like images.js, you may have a folder called pages. So you may have a folder called pages. Inside that pages, you may want to define a new item called page control, and this page control is about. Okay, talks about you and your company and everything. Now, the moment you have that, the about page gets created, right? And it has got all this UI dark, base, UI, and everything included. Now, imagine that if you are loading this page outside of this, then all of them will get downloaded. Because it is already cached and loaded, you don't download it, right? So that is the only reason we tell you to do that, and it's also very easy to keep the state as is, because otherwise it becomes stateless, right? So if you have a JavaScript variable, you are changing over a period of time for every action you are doing, it keeps the state of the JavaScript object, right? That variable, you can reuse that variable in the next page. But if you are changing things, you probably have to use the local store session state or something like that, which is specific to HTML5.
IE10 is implementing the index-making capabilities.
Yes, I mean, like the IE10 JavaScript Chakra engine, which we have implemented in IE10, is this runtime. So it is the same experience.
I'm asking about the database features, local storage.
So whatever there in HTML5, so you will find in this. So as I said at the beginning of my talk, right, you have got the complete HTML, CSS, and everything for the web stack plus the WinRT while building this application.
Yeah, I have a question. So, like .NET has support for writing multi-threaded applications, and it has a nice task parallel library. Is there similar support for JavaScript applications, like JavaScript store apps?
That's a good question, but I don't think it has got. I haven't explored that because TPL requires you to have multi-core paradigm, and that API I haven't seen that in Windows 8, WinRT set.
Does it not even exist for, like, say, the C# application, C# store app?
So whatever you find in C# is available in JS, because at the end of the day they are all WinRT. They are exposed in multiple ways to different applications through metadata. But whatever the API you can use in C# which belongs to WinRT are available for JS as well.
So I also understand that JavaScript applications can have something called background scripts or background tasks.
Yeah.
Which are scripts that can be run even when an app is suspended. So are these run on the same thread as this app?
No, it doesn't run on the same thread. T-shirt. Size specific, just are the size. So you may get it from outside, you get it in the booth. No point giving a smaller size t-shirt to somebody which doesn't fit. Yeah.
How exactly WinJS handles the error, user side error? Like once the application is deployed and users start using it and some errors occur. I guess we might not know what errors occur, right? Is there any we can get the errors whatever the user based on? Is there any way to track up the user?
Okay, I got your question. Okay, so see, at the end of the day, it's a user device. So it is your laptop or your tablet which you are owning. Unless you give that error to me, I cannot really access that. So you might have seen that there is an error handling mechanism in WinJS XHR. So you can actually store it to your local storage, and then as a developer, I have to write code to get that in a single file and write some mechanism to send it through an email. But that end user has to do it. That means if I get an error, at the end of the day, if I'm doing a dog fooding, I can tell that, hey, I got some 100+ errors for last 5 days. Why don't I share it with my developer? So I'm a tester, let's say. So I go ahead and get those errors and mail it to the developer. So that way I can get those logs and then send it.
You are having a number of apps, right? So for example, if you are switching from one app to another app, you are holding the app in the corner of your code, right?
Yeah.
So will it make any performance issues?
No. So I mean, like if it keeps on piling apps after apps, so you find the less used app will be killed after some time. So it's all about available resources in your machine.
For example, in your app, you are hitting one page and you are waiting for one response for which application. At the time, you are thinking to switch to some other app, right? At the time, it's loading the page, right? It will cause some performance issues.
Yeah. So it won't, because whatever app goes in the background has got a less priority. So the app which is in the foreground, which is actually in front of you, is the active one. So it will make sure that the foreground application has got the enough memory resource to execute.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Like if I'm navigating, if I'm hitting on URL in the YouTube, right? So the video is streaming. So at the time I'm checking my mails. So even though I'm checking my mails, the video is streaming, right? So how it will
it won't stream. For this Win8 app style, it won't stream. It will stop over there. I'll show you an example. So if I, let's say, go into the video. So let's just play some video which I have locally in my machine. So there's a channel line video on perform. So I'll just run this. So you can see that video is playing, right? Video stopped. Video paused actually.
The question was not about, I think, it is playing the video but streaming the video.
So it will also stop. No, it will stop. It will stop. So anything which goes in the background will stop. So then you have to write it in differently. By default, it won't work.
No, I don't want to waste my time while streaming the video, so I can switch to some other.
Then you have to write the code to stream it differently. So by default, if you are considering the Windows 8 store style app, then it won't work. So whichever goes in the background is suspended.
So some other limitations are there.
I mean, like I said, that you may want to write in a different way.
What kind of database support, like native database support, is there in Windows Phone 8?
SQLite.
SQLite.
Yeah. Yeah. T-shirt. People who are asking, you can just share the T-shirt. Yeah.
In
Yeah,
Windows
just-
Phone,
Yeah.
actually, while deploying the Windows Phone 7 application, we will deploy it in the form of .zap file.
Yeah, correct.
What is the deployment file type here in Windows 8?
That's a great question. So if you go and then go and say that store and then create an app package. Okay. So what it's gonna do is that it's gonna ask you whether it's Windows Store. I say no. Locally I gonna create a package. So it's gonna save this and then say create. So it's created, right? I go to this location. I go to the test. It's an app appx, both for XAML and HTML. So what this appx also contains is a PowerShell script. This one. So for example, right now it is installed. Every time you run it from Visual Studio, it gets installed. So if you see that, what was my application name? I think it was F5. Okay. So if I go into this, and then I have got the F5 already installed, so I can right click and uninstall, and it gets uninstalled. Okay. Now I come back to my desktop, and then I can side load it, which means that I can separately install. I don't have to install from store all the time. Right? So what I can do, I can go into this location, right click into this PowerShell PS1 file. This is a PS1 file. Okay. And run the PowerShell. So it will first prompt me to run it in admin mode. So I'll just follow the step. So now what it will do, it will say ask me to run it in admin mode. Yes, it will get closed and open another PowerShell script. And oh, I did run that. Enter continue. Now my application is going to get open and run in the desktop. So it is getting installed. So that's how basically install an application, right? So when we talk about AEL, we do a lot of AEL, the Application Excellence Lab. We get only the appx file from the developer, right? So let me just go back into my desktop. I find the app5 here. I can run that. It is installed separately, right? So that's how you sideload your application. So it's appx and along with all those resources. So if it is HTML, JS, you will find all those resources within en us, the package, and you find all those dependencies, all these appx files, including the certificate you are associating and everything. Yeah.
Can we have a progress ring bar in the splash screen? I mean, we have actually processed ring bar. Can we have something called as progress ring?
Yeah, you can have, because that is part of WinJS control. So I should actually show you that. So there is a test drive site. So let me also share in this thing. So do you see my screen? So these are the set of controls in HTML5 which you can use in your application. So you can see that starting from button to a drop down checkbox, you have the progress bar, you have a progress ring, anything you want you can use in your application. So splash screen, you can also use this progress bar, but I would rather recommend not to load a lot of things in the splash screen, because that's also part of a Windows Store check when you get certified for your application, how much time it is taking to load your application. So if you try to load a lot of things in the page load event and it goes beyond the time limit, then your application certification may fail. Okay, so try to load it asynchronously when you are on the page itself.
What is the size limit of an app?
Sorry?
What is the size limit?
I don't remember. I think 5 GB or so. It's there in the store. So 5 GB or so. That's the total size. But I don't remember. No, I'm not sure about it.
One more.
Yeah.
Can we add timer? Like, splash screen has 5 seconds. So after that it will load.
Yeah.
And can we set the timeout? So if I'm downloading some data from the net?
Yeah. So you have seen in the async callback mechanism, right? There is a callback method and there is a timeout option. So if you mention the timeout option, that's a millisecond value you specify. So if you want to explicitly specify the timeout option, you can definitely do that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How easy is it to write your own custom WinJS control?
Custom
WinJS control.
So what is the specific requirement? Let me understand that first.
So it's like
Just like that, you want to create custom control.
yeah, it's like
So what we call there when we talk to partner, we say a very nice word called reinventing the wheel. So kind of controls you get in HTML5 is really rich.
Now what he is asking, right, in list box, right? In some of the languages we can use item renders. For example, say we can able to place checkboxes at the end of the.
So that is what you use item template.
That's what he is.
Yeah. So there you use item template. So if you want to format the existing control like a list box, how your data will be bind. So let's say in a list box it can be horizontal like this, and you have a checkbox and a title, a text, and a radio button and a progress bar. You can create a template. One data row, if you consider a SQL Server data row, that data will be displayed like this. So if you have 10 row, it will come in a block of that style. So you don't need a control. You can just define an item template and associate that template to the div tag, where you use the data win attribute to specify what kind of control you are using in the div tag. You don't need to define a control. Yeah.
So when an app goes into the background, do we have to take care of the events, whatever is happening, and on resume we have to take care of
Yes.
it, or this online process?
Yeah. So that's as a developer you have to take care. So if you want to create an illusion to the end user that they might have left the app and coming back, let's say I was typing some email, right? And I because this tablet and mobile device users are very fickle minded generally. So I go back and there's some pop-up, right? And somebody wants to talk to me. So I went and then started chatting. So actually the mail application went in the background, right? So it is in the suspended mode. It may get killed. So what we do, we just remember the page where we were, okay, using the navigation thing. And we also store the text we were typing in multiple areas. Let's say I typed something in a to box, I typed something in a CC, BCC, and then a subject line, and also the body. We store that value into local storage. So next time you open the application, we see through the first loading option you might have seen in my application, right? So it said that activation kind is the event, is the value through which you can say that is it launched or it is coming from something else, right? Was it terminated? So based on that condition, you preload the data. So if it was terminated, you preload the data. If it is freshly launched, you open a new mailbox or just show the inbox. Maybe. That as a developer you have to do.
Yeah, that's kind of like trying to remember the state or something.
Yeah.
But what happens if suppose I fire an XDR call and I'm waiting for a callback or something, and then my app goes into background. So when an app comes back, what happens to the callback?
So ideally speaking, when you do a XHR call and then you put your app back at the back, it's in a suspended mode.
Yeah. So what if the callback occurs at that point of time, or?
So that's a good question that we have to check that out.
Actually, I think that's the answer.
Yeah.
And also, is there a different set of rules for paid and free apps for certification process?
No. For the certification process, it's the same. The only thing is that you can actually enable the trial mode. That's a good practice. So if you have really built a nice application, if I am paying $200 rupees for that application, I want to try that out. Unless it is so appealing like Angry Bird, right? You don't have to have a trial edition at all. But if you are building an application which you are putting a price tag for it, you ideally should be having a trial edition for that. So it's a very simple code through which you can enable and disable that, and you can specify the duration of the trial edition. So for example, if you enable the trial edition for 1 month, there's an API available that comes below. I shared the hands-on lab, right? Ujjwal's thing. So there is a hands-on lab. If you go, the last lab talks about that API, Windows Store API. So there you can enable the timeline, say that it will be trial for 1 month, and then once that 1 month is over, people will actually get the notification. They won't be able to use it.